Welcome to Quilter's Architect. My name is Mark. In this video, I'm continuing my work on my 9 Live sampler quilt, and I've completed blocks 1 through 7 in previous videos, and today I'm going to do block number 8. This block is called 16 patch, and let me show that here on the screen so you can see it. And this is a fairly simple block. It just has, if you look at page 2 of the instructions for this block, it just has the fabrics Dresden and Country, and it's a fairly simple block. If you would like to download the overall quilt pattern, look at the description of this video. There's a link there to do that. And if you would like to download the cutting instructions and assembly instructions for this specific block, I also have a link for that in the video description. So in this series, I've been sharing experiences, near-death experiences from my past, and kind of trying to tie them to each of these blocks. And it kind of goes along with this theme of my 9 lives. So when I look at this block, what I immediately thought of was, you've seen these large department stores that have tile floors. A lot of them, not many of them probably have this type of floor now, I don't know, but I've worked in stores where they had this type of flooring. And that work that I did is related to my experience. So when I was in my early 20s, Sherry and I were living in Owensboro, Kentucky, and we ended up knowing some guys who their job was to work at night, and they went to all kinds of stores that had these tile floors everywhere. They would strip the wax off the floor, they would put new wax on the floor, and then they would take a buffer through the whole store. Man, those floors would look good. They were really beautiful, like really nice and shiny and clean. Well, I had never done that work before, and the work that I was doing at the time is I was working for a friend of mine who did, if you have ever been around this business, there's a business called Trimline, and that business is putting striping, decals, trim, window tinting, and various accessories on cars. Well, that was not his business name. He had his own business, but he did the very same type of business. And so I worked for him, and we would drive around to car lots every day. And the driving was somewhat extensive because you might drive 30 or 40 or 50 miles in one direction, and maybe there'd be a few car lots there. And then you would drive another direction and find more car lots. And you'd have a route for that day that you would go to do work on cars at either car lots or body shops typically. So it was a lot of driving. At the same time I was doing that job, working on customizing cars with pinstripes, decals, and window tinting, things like that, my friends who were doing the flooring at night kept asking me, would you like to learn? I guess they were looking for more people to do the work, or they thought I could change and move into that line of work and have a better income. I don't remember exactly the reason, but they kept asking me would I like to come along, and I was like, okay, I'll come with you guys one night and you can teach me how to do it, because it's not a real complicated thing. It's a fairly basic process to strip wax from a floor, reapply the wax, and then to buff the floors. And so I went with them one night, and this was during the week. So I was going to have to go to work the next day and work my normal job. And this work is done typically from after the store closes. So you're talking about 11 or after, sometimes midnight. And then you would have until early morning, say let's 4, 5, 6 a.m. to complete the work. And so we're in this large store, and it has a floor that reminds me of this 16 patch block. And we're doing that work all night. It was fine. I mean, during the night, I really didn't feel that tired. I wasn't getting sleep or anything because, you know, the work was fun. The people I was with were fun to get along with, and I was learning something new. Well, the next day I went to work, and it was one of those days where I had to drive long distances. And so I had driven quite a bit that day. I didn't have any troubles, and I was driving back to Owensboro. That was our home base. That's where we lived. And we drove to all these other places from Owensboro, Kentucky. I was on this road that's I think it's about 25 miles or something like that between two cities. It's a fairly busy road. And I'm driving this as my friend's work van for his business. It was like a large Chevy van, and it was a nice van. And I'm driving down the road. Of course, I hadn't slept any that night, right? I had not slept any, because by the time we got back from doing those floors, I went straight from that into working the next day. I fell asleep. It wasn't like I was nodding off. I think my body finally said, that's it. You cannot stay awake anymore. And I just went out. And so I'm driving down the road 55 miles an hour in traffic. And when I fell asleep, I didn't know it. I didn't realize I was falling asleep. When I woke up and my eyes open, there were cars stopped in front of me. And it was a series of cars. I don't know, it was probably like 4 or 5 cars stopped where someone was turning off the road. And we're talking about a full stop, and I'm going 55 miles an hour. I just woke up in time to swerve to the right and not run into the back of the car that was in the very back of this 4 or 5 car stop. And I went down the edge of the road, and I went past all the cars that were stopped before I could get stopped. You could imagine how, if I hadn't woke up and I was going 55 miles an hour and I rear-ended those cars, I imagine I probably would have died. I don't even know, I'm not sure if the van from back then had airbags or if I'd had any protection. I think I had my seatbelt on because I've always worn my seatbelt. But anyways, imagine if I hadn't woke up, and I probably would have injured or killed someone else. So that was a really close call. And my heart was, you know how they say your heart's up in your throat or pounding out of your chest? It definitely was like that after I woke up and I saw what almost happened. And so the lesson learned from that is you cannot stay up all night. You can stay up all night, but you can't stay up all night and function the next day. I know some people who can do it and they can pull it off, but I was a young person then, right in my mid-20s. It taught me that you can't do without sleep. You can maybe fool yourself into thinking you can do that, but your body has its limits. And in my case, like that day I was driving, there was no warning. I don't remember nodding off or anything. I was just asleep. And then I woke up in time not to have a serious accident. So anybody who's thinking about they can pull that off working at night and working in the day, trying to do 2 jobs, I would say that's a really bad idea. But everybody has to make their own decisions. But I think these are the kind of experiences you learn from, and definitely we can share these with our family and friends. Hopefully by sharing them with them, we can help someone else avoid making similar mistakes. So every time I look at this quilt, once it's done, I'm sure I'm going to be thinking of those floors that we stripped the wax off of and re-waxed and buffed that night. They looked really good, but it nearly cost me my life to learn some other type of work. So I have all the pieces cut out already, and I've laid them here, organized them here so we can see them together. And you'll notice on page 2 of our block instructions, we're using Dresden and Country, the names of fabrics in the pattern. You're going to cut 8 2.5-inch squares of each of these fabrics to make up our 16 patch. If we look at page 3, we have the instructions for making the 16 patch, and this just tells us to join the squares as illustrated in figure A1. Now I know there's another way to make 16 patches, and Sherry actually had mentioned that to me. I had already cut the fabric into all these squares, but she said there's another way that can be more efficient sometimes, but I chose this way because I'd already cut the fabric pieces out. So you can ignore this if you have a different way you like to make 16 patches, but this is the way I'm going to do it for the demonstration since I'd already cut my fabric pieces. I'm going to get started doing that. I'm going to treat these like 4 units, an upper left, upper right, lower left, lower right unit of 4. And I'll join these together. And then once we have all those units, we can assemble those 4 units into the block. One thing I wanted to mention is a point I learned from Sherry recently. She said one of the things we can do to make this easier is press towards the dark. Instead of opening the seam and pressing it open, press towards the dark. And the reason this is helpful is because these are alternating, right? When we have these sets of pieces alternating, well, when we're going to join those together, because they're alternating, the seam is offset one side to the other where the fabric should line up together. And she said this naturally helps line up where the fabrics come together between the 2 units because of that offset that's on opposing sides once you try to join these 2 units. So that's something I did as I pressed these seams. I pressed them towards the dark. If you take a close look at it, it definitely does seem like something that helps to line up the fabric properly. Because if we do this 16 patch and our units aren't lined up with each other where these squares are at, then it's not going to be a very nice looking 16 patch, right? You can kind of feel how it sets real nice when those 2 are lined up properly. Now that I have the upper left, upper right, lower left, and lower right 4 units put together, now I can just join these kind of like a 4 patch, and then we'll have our entire block joined together. given that we did that offset of pressing towards the dark, this also, it may not help us on this seam going together, but it still helps us here because we're still dealing with that offset. And so I'm going to continue to use that to my advantage as I'm lining up the fabric. If I let it just lay in there naturally, we see that it almost comes out exactly where it should come out, and it sets nicely too. Like you can kind of feel how it sets down in that little offset. Okay, so now we just have to join the two sides together and we'll have this block completed. Okay, so now that we have our 16 patch joined together, I'm just going to starch it lightly and then we can square it up. Here's our 16 patch block all completed, and I think it turned out real nice. I like these fabrics together, and when I look at this quilt, whenever it gets all finished up and I see the 16 patch block, I'm going to think back to Owensboro, Kentucky when I tried to stay up all night and then work the next day, which was a bad decision that nearly cost me my life driving. And I hope you enjoyed watching me demonstrate making this block. I have one block left to go, block number 9. And so when I make that video and demonstrate making that block, I'll share my last near-death experience with you. And I hope you're enjoying watching this series on the My 9 Lives sampler quilt. And please leave any comments you would like to make, suggestions, tips and tricks, or your own experiences that relate to these videos. If you enjoy the video, please give me a thumbs up. That's always helpful to know. And likewise, if you haven't subscribed to my channel, please subscribe, because I'll be making more of these videos and sharing more quilt patterns. In the meantime, I'm wishing you happy sewing and beautiful finishes.